So the purpose of the 49 days of counting is to sphere Malashim Behirus, that our midah should be shining and our personality should be refined and transformed, and then we're ready for Matan Torah. So it's explained in Chassidus that even though in order to be ready you have to refine all 7 midas in general, but to a certain extent, once a person has mastered and refined the first 5 midas, which is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, to some extent, it's considered that he's now transformed midas-wise. And that's why, at this point, Hod Shebahod, we're sort of ready for Matan Torah in a certain level. And that's another reason why this is such a special day. So I just want to explain this a little bit, which fits into the Maimah we were learning. Why is it considered that? First we say the main midas is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes. And all the rest are branches, extensions. Now we're saying, out of all the rest, the first 2 are the main midas, which is Netzach and Hod. And the rest are not. And main thing is the first 5, up to Hod. So what is it? So we can divide it into 3 categories. The first category is the midas themselves. So that would be, good morning, Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes. Thank you. So Chesed is any midah, any kind of emotion that brings me closer to someone outside of myself. Generally speaking, that would be Ava, love. And Gevura is any kind of midah, any emotion that creates a distance between me and someone else or something else, causes me to withdraw, to pull away, to push back. That's Gevura. And Tiferes is when there's an attribute, an emotion that's a combination of both. These are the midas. Netzach and Hod are not so much the midas themselves. Netzach and Hod is the determination of carrying out the midas, like to have perseverance, to keep going to the end. So let's say someone, for example, has a feeling of Ava, love for someone, and as a result of that, they want to help that person. Let's say right now somebody would hear what's going on in Israel, how difficult it is, and somebody gets very, inspired by it, and decides, I'm going to go to Israel and help people wherever they are because the conditions are so difficult, and you have a very strong feeling. You get very inspired if someone from Israel came and talked about the difficulties that they're having in the fields. Let's say, use that as an example, that they don't have Arab workers because our workers can be trusted, as unfortunately we've seen many times. So now they're suffering economically, and someone hears that and gets very inspired. This is Eretz Yisrael, we shouldn't let that happen. I feel bad, so bad for these people. And you get all inspired and you're going out there to do it. How do you get there? You have to arrange a ticket. Before you arrange a ticket, you have to talk to your boss. Could you take a few weeks off? And then you talk to your boss, and the first time you talk to him, he's not so excited about it. And he says, I don't think so. We'll talk about it tomorrow. And they have to talk it again. And you have to bring in another person. And finally, you get past that. Then you have to arrange the ticket, and there's no flights, and you have to go through different places. It'll be a 22-hour trip if you go this way. It's another problem. Then, of course, you don't have the money, so you have to go borrow money somewhere. And where am I going to get money to make the trip? Why am I saying all this? When you initially got inspired, that's the emotion. That would be the chesed. You got all inspired. When you start getting involved in the technicalities of how to carry out that desire that I have, you don't feel that same inspiration when you're talking to your boss, for example, like you felt when you're sitting there and listening to somebody that's asking you to come out and help. And that's also not the feeling you have when you're talking to the airlines or to the travel agent or talking to someone else that you need to do technical arrangements. What you do have is whatever was inspiration you had is pushing you and driving you not to stop and not to let anything get in your way and not to let you get discouraged. that feeling is not a pure emotion. It's more about getting the job done. You follow me? In other words, when I actually, or the same with the Ruchnis, a person is davening, and in davening, he is burning on the words of the davening by the greatness of Hashem, and he thinks about it. It makes him feel love for Hashem, and he's all inspired, and he feels it in his heart, and the tears are coming down from his eyes. He's feeling all these feelings, and then he makes a certain achlata that because of this, I'm going to be doing, let's say I'll make a shir, I'll be learning every day more than I did, or I'll do a certain mitzvah. And then as he needs to do it, he encounters certain difficulties, certain challenges. So he has to keep moving. And that excitement and that ava, that love for Hashem that he got in davening is the driving force that keeps him going and doesn't let him stop and give up because of the challenges. But the feeling of love that he felt for Hashem while he was davening is so much different, so much more pure, and it's much more emotional than the feeling you have when you have to go out and deal with things that are sort of, you're being confronted with challenges. So again, it's inspired by that love, but it's not on the same level. It's not as inspiring, and it's not as powerful as it was when at first I had that explosive feeling in my heart. So therefore, Netzach is considered lower, it's less. But on the other hand, is the driving force that will get me to do it. And we said that Hoid is the same thing, just in the other direction, when I have to hold back something, I have to restrain myself because of Gvura. So basically, Netzach, all the midos, Chesed and Netzach, or Gvura and Hoid, it's all one, except Chesed is the first stage, and Netzach is the second stage. But it's all about the way I feel internally. Yesod and Malchus, the next two spheres, are not so much about how I feel, it's more about now there's the part in a person where the person is giving the hashpah to whatever they're doing, to whomever they're doing it. So let's say this person, because he loves the student, therefore he's going to spend time to teach them and to explain them, like the example I gave you about this Tana who repeated the same class 400 times to make sure that he gets it. So when you're actually getting into the mode of giving over the information to the student, that's already Yesod and Malchus. Yesod is the connection, and Malchus is the actual, when you're actually transmitting it either through speech or through action. So to give an example, what would be Yesod? There's a story with the Rabbi Marash. The Rabbi Marash, as every Rebbe, had Yechidus, where a chassid comes in, and they ask whatever question they have to ask, and then another chassid goes in, another chassid goes in. So every night, the Rabbi Marash would see many chassidim. One time, he stopped the Yechidus in the middle, called in his secretary, and he said, I need to change my shirt. So he went and got a different shirt, changed his shirt. When he took the shirt that he was wearing, he saw that it was sort of wet from he was perspiring, he was sweating. And he was like shocked. You know, if you see somebody carrying a heavy load in a hot summer day, you can understand. He's sitting in the room, answering people's questions, and yet his shirt is soaked as if he was doing some physical hard labor. So he decided he's going to say something, and he asked Rabbi Marash, well, "What is this? Why are you sweating like that? You didn't do any kind of physical hard labor that should warrant such sweating." So he said to him that like this: when a chassid comes into me, and he asks me a question, and let's say this chassid is a person who works on a farm, that's his occupation. In order for me to answer his question, I have to understand his question. In order to understand his question, I have to dress myself into his situation. I have to wear his hat and his levush, his garment that he wears out in the field. and look at things from that perspective. And now I understand where he's coming from. But if I stay there, I can't answer him. So I have to get dressed back into my garments and look at it from my perspective. And now I can answer him and give him a solution and an answer to his question. After him, a Malamed walks in, someone who teaches little children Torah. And he asked me, I'm not sure these details are accurate. I'm just giving an example, but that's the general content. So Malamed walks in, and he teaches little children, and he has a question about what he's doing. In order for me to answer him, I have to first see things from his perspective. So I have to put on his garments, and I have to think of his position of teaching children, get dressed in his situation. Then I could really see what he's saying. But in order to answer him, I have to go back to be who I am, and I can answer him. And that's what happens to every single person that walks in and walks out. So you should imagine changing everything you wear 100 times. So it's physically hard labor. This would be an example, I think, of Yesod. Before I give the person an answer, I'm not just giving an answer to a question. I have to connect myself to this person, what they feel, how they look at things, what's their perspective, what they're going through, and then I can answer that question. And the same is with learning. If I'm teaching a student, you say it will be when I have to invest myself into things like, who is this student? What's his background? What does he know? What doesn't he know? What's his level of understanding? How can I explain it to him? That's only a result of my connecting to the student. And after I connect to the student, that's Yesod, then comes Malchus, then I start speaking and telling him whatever I'm teaching on a level that he could receive. Yeah.
The Malchus that was made through speech or action, it's the lower Malchus or the from Ratzon or the upper Malchus from Daniel?
That's the lower Malchus, there's external Malchus. That means here's the point where now it's sort of going out of me into another world, into the other person, or to another object, whatever it is that I'm doing. In other words, Tainug is achi pnimi. External means the more it's closer to the outside, it's further away from me. Let's say intellect is considered the most internal. Midas are external. Why are Midas external? Because Midas is the part in my neshama that's moved by something or someone outside of myself. Because it's something in me that's connected to the outside. It says that one of the things about Midas we see that people, when they have a certain emotion, have a certain need to share it with someone. When you have good news, what's the first thing you want to do? Who am I going to call? Or the opposite, which means midas are something that are connects me with things or people outside of me. And nevertheless, there's that stage where I'm feeling inside whatever I feel about this person. But malchus is when I'm actually connecting, doing something for the person. Whether it's, like I said, teaching a person, giving tzedakah to a person, or it's guiding a person in one way or another. But before I do the actual malchus, it has to be yesod. I have to connect to that person, and then I can give it to them in a successful way. So that means that as far as the midas are concerned, just the pure emotion, that's mainly chesed, gevura, teferes, netzach, hoy. And once all these five are in the right place, then generally speaking, the midas have been corrected and now they're in a good place. So that's why when it comes to Lag Baomer, it means we already counted 5 weeks, counted Hoyd, even though we didn't finish the 5th week, but in the 5th week, we're up to the Hoyd of Hoyd. So that means that in essence, it's something which was just completed. As a result of that, we're on a certain level ready for Matan Torah. I remember in the year Topshin Mem Ches, which is 1988, the Rebbe said that this year is exactly 3,300 years when the Torah was given. What's the significance of 3,300? It's 33. So there's 33. There's 33 times 10, which is 330. And then there's 33 times 100, which is 3,300. In other words, when you understand things up this, 33 means that we have now each sphere containing the others in them. 330 would mean that containing all, each one contains all 10, so you have 330. And then if all the 330, each one contains 10, then you have contains 100, then you have 3,300. It means in principle it's all the same. It's Hoyd within Hoyd, but it just depends how detailed you're going. So in general, I think this should help us understand whenever you find something in Torah that's connected to a number or measurement, it's not random, and it's not only because, oh, this looks nice, it's the more symmetrical if it's this measurement or that measurement, like in the Beis Hamikdash, but it's all connected to spheres. So those things that have to do number 3 are connected to these spheres. And then has to do number 5 are connected to these spheres. Number 2 is different spheres. When they have 70, like it says, the Yidden Mitzrayim were 70, it's a 7 meters, each one consists of 10. When we say that it took 40 days for Yidden to receive the Torah, again, it means the same thing, that every day, it was, again, which sphere is it exactly? When we get there, we'll talk about that. But it means something spiritual had to happen, and that spiritual process takes 40 days. In some cases, things took 40 years. And the reason is because it had to go through 40 stages. Stages of what? It's generally speaking, spheres, but it depends which spheres and how many spheres included in those spheres. That's where the numbers usually come from.
What's the difference between having the 40 stages and the 49?
It was for a different purpose. In the Midbar, they were preparing to go into Eretz Yisrael. So you can ask the question, why not 40 days? Why 40 years? So that has to do, again, you have to know the spiritual network to understand why in this case we're specific. Like the days of the week are 7 days because it's 7 meters. We don't say that a week consists of 49 days. When it comes to sphere assignment, no, you need all 49, you need each detail. So that's already connected to knowing what each thing is to understand why over here it has to be so detailed and over there it's more general. In some places there are explanations of Chassidus. Even in this Maimon that we learned, what does it say that when they counted the years, the 7 cycles, it was 7 years. We don't connect the number 49, just the number 7. But when it comes to the Midos, it's actually for each person, so your soul, it's 49. I think of it as in the Gashmi commercial, because when you're dealing with Gashmis, we understand what we're talking about, so it's easy to understand. Imagine somebody says that we have a community here with 500 families, so we need 500 apartments. Okay, makes sense. Being that there are 500 families, you need 500 apartments. How come the person also added that we need 5,000, not 5,000, let's say he said we'll need, 5,000 window shades. There's only 500 families. Why do we need 5,000 window shades? What's the answer? Because there's 500 families, you need 500 apartments, but each apartment has 10 windows, so you need 5,000 window shades, whatever the amount would be. And something else, you would need a different number because this is only for the children, and there are so many children in these families. This is a different number because this is just for the adults, and this is for a different number because it's only the women. So that means in Gashmis we understand that even though it's 500 families, but there's so many other things, depending on which detail you're relating to, that's the number that you'll need. And but the Ruchnis works the same way. So this is connected to something which I also mentioned. Another thing which I want to say, which is a big part of Lag Baomer, is of course the Rabbeim would say a mimer in connection to Lag Baomer. Most of the Maimarim are with the words Hine Matev Manoim Sheva Sachem Gam Yachad. Why is that? Because the Zohar there's a story, and the Maimarim elaborate on this story. What's the story? That there was a time they needed rain, and they came to Reb Shimon bar Yochai to pray for rain. Instead of davening for rain, he did something else. He said Torah, which obviously Pnimis are Torah. They didn't think it's a Torah, but he expounded on the pasuk. Hine Matev Manoim Sheva Sachem Gam Yachad. And when he finished, it started to rain. So, what does it talk about in Chassidus? It talks about the fact that there are two ways to bring about rain in the world. Generally speaking, rain is brought around in the world through tefillah, through prayer. And in fact, there's a lot of halachas what to do if chas v'shalom there's no rain. First, you have to daven. If that doesn't help, the Rabbanim, the Bezdin should declare a fast day. If that doesn't help, they declare another fast day. And then there's a whole system of how many fast days and what way you do it, and a whole order of things that you keep davening and fasting until something changes. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai did something else, not davening, not fasting. He said Torah on the words of Hine Matev Manoim, and it started to rain, which means that he did things a different way. And what was the connection? Connection like this: everything that's down here comes from up there, right? That's one of the basics of Chassidus, Kabbalah. Everything in the physical world evolves from the spiritual world. So therefore, just like it applies to everything else, applies to rain. For it to rain down here, something has to occur up there, which is the source of rain. And once it occurs up there, from there it evolves, and then it's rain down here. What he did was he spoke words of Torah and explained what is the meaning of rain in the spiritual realm. Right. That it's about the merging of Zoh and Malchus and whatever else it is that he explained. So once he explained that, it brought about the rain in the spiritual realm. And from there, it evolved and became a physical rain. And this is something which is specifically related to Pnimis HaTorah, which means we find this approach to tzaddikim that were connected to Zohar and Chassidus. We find stories like this with Baal Shem Tov, and the same with the other Rabbeim, that there were times when they just needed to accomplish something. They did it not so much through prayer, but through saying words of Torah on a certain subject, and that made it happen. Like the famous story that happened in our generation, the story with the Rebbe in 1953, which we spoke about Purim time, where Stalin had planned to do something, Rahman al-Islam, very similar to what Hitler did. It started off with a plot of accusing Jewish doctors that they're poisoning political leaders. And of course, it was all false accusations, but they were arresting one Jewish doctor after another. And then the plan was to arrest all the Jews and send them off to camps, Rahman al-Islam. Anyway, so some of you know the story that on Purim, in Yud Gimel 1953, the Rebbe had a farbrengen, and he said a mimer. Of course, the mimer was all about Haman, and then something which hardly ever happened, that the Rebbe should say more than one mimer at a farbrengen. A farbrengen is sichas, one sicha, a niggin, another sicha, a niggin. Yeah. But a mimer, what is the difference? A mimer, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe would say with his eyes closed. There would be a special niggin that you sing before the mimer. The mimer itself, when the Rebbe gave it over in a special tune. And also when the Rebbe said a mimer, he held in his hand a cloth. These are four things that every time the Rebbe said a mimer. Sicha comes more like from the word of a casual conversation. Even though Chas v'Shalom, there's nothing casual by the Rebbe, but it's a different here. And the Sicha, the Rebbe would talk about a Rambam, the Rebbe could talk about Gemara, the Rebbe could talk about current events, Eretz Yisrael. A mimer is more pure spiritual. So here, at a certain point, the Rebbe told the story. The story was about when it came time to vote for the Tsar. The was a chassid. He had no clue what was going on. He was totally disinterested in politics. But he heard that the Rebbe Rashab said to do it, so he went. Like the Rebbe said, he probably put on his gartel because he's not doing it for other purpose. It was the Rebbe said so. And everybody told him what to do. Here's what you have to do. And after they did what they did, they all shouted, "Hurrah!" Like in Russia, it means hooray. But this chassid was thinking of the Hebrew words, hurrah. And the Rebbe said 3 times out loud, hurrah, which means he is evil. Hurrah, hurrah. The Rebbe held his hands like this. This is actually a picture of this. And then after that, the Rebbe's color of the Rebbe's face changed. And the Rebbe said he's saying another mimer. The Rebbe said another mimer. And then news started to come out of Russia that something happened with Stalin. They're not sure. He's not well. Anyway, a few days later, they found out that he was dead. And when did it happen? Exactly at that time that the Rebbe was 4 o'clock in the morning, when the Rebbe was bringing and said the second mimer. So that means the Rebbe said a mimer, and as a result of that, this Haman was eliminated. And there's a what?
In Russia?
Yeah. How did it reach from here to Russia? The mimer accomplishes things up there. Up there, it's already, they have an express line that goes straight to any country in the world. This is a story with the Alter Rebbe. It's a long story with a lot of details, but also that there was someone that this person's mother-in-law came running to the Alter Rebbe, is crying as that her husband is by the church right now and he wants to convert. Not her husband, her son-in-law. And she can't believe it. There was a whole story why it happened, how it happened. But anyway, the Alter Rebbe instructed them to basically, first the Alter Rebbe said words of Torah, I'll say this, on the Pasuk in Chumash, where it says, V'nefesh ki sechata, if a Yid will do an Aveira. And the Zohar says that really there's a question mark there, saying like, how is it possible that a Yid should do an Aveira? Then he elaborated on it. And after that very same night, he came to the Alter Rebbe's shul, became a Baal Tshuva, which means he said something in Torah, and that had an effect on this person. So the same as Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, he said words of Torah, and when you say things in Torah, it makes things happen, which is also the basis for what the Rebbe says, to learn in Yonah Mashiach Agula, and that'll hasten Mashiach's coming. And we're so used to this way of thinking that I remember when I repeated this somewhere in a shul, it was in Borough Park, someone said, whoever heard of such a thing? Just because you learn about something, it makes it happen. It was like, it was new to them. The whole idea was very new. But really, the Rebbe shows that it's found in the Medrash, which says if you didn't learn about building the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem says, I'll consider it as if you're actually building it. What does that mean? It means that by learning about it, we're making it happen sooner. Because we're building it up there by learning about it, and by building it up there, it eventually comes down here. So the Rebbe said this is similar to the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash was the Chatchila Rebbe. This is also the Chatchila Rebbe. Rather than fasting and praying one day and another day and begging and pleading, well, you know the story with Choni Amagal, who made a circle, right? Took a stick, made a circle on the sand, and said to Hashem, I'm not leaving the circle until you bring rain for your children. Then the Gemara says the rain started to come down so strong, they came running to him and said, it's going to destroy all the crop. He said, Hashem, it's too strong. Could you please make it lighter? Then they came back and said, it's falling so softly, it's not going to do anything. But Hashem, it's too soft. Could you make it the right measure? Anyway, and then it was perfect. So that's when you get rain through prayer. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is the Chatchila Rebbe. In other words, he just corrected things up there, and automatically it happened down here. And that was the theme of the Rebbe Marash. And if I told you this, but there's just another example of a Chatchila Rebbe. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, I did tell you, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditcheler, every year, in the beginning of the winter, would have a meeting with the Balabatim of his shul, because he needed heating, and they wanted people to sponsor the heating for the year. So all the people, especially those who are wealthier, they would sponsor. One would sponsor a month, one would sponsor a few weeks, and they got the whole year covered. So in the beginning of the year, they would do this. He came home, and the Rebbitzin said to him, so how did the meeting go? He said, well, Hashem, successful. This chassid gave this chassid sponsored that, then one chassid sponsored this. And she said to him in a humorous way, how much did you give? He says, I promised 2 weeks of warm weather. That's l'chatchila riba. I don't have to give wood and spend money. I just arrange warm weather and that's it. And we're done. So because of this, I think I mentioned yesterday, I'm not sure if it was this class or that class, that spheres, remember did I tell you yesterday about the spheres could be counted two ways? No? There are two opinions how to count the spheres. We start off the first day chesed shebechesed, and the last day malchus shebemalchus. And tonight will be hoyt shebehoyt. There's another opinion in Kabbalah that we go the reverse. The first night is malchus shebemalchus, and we work our way up. And the last night is chesed shebechesed. So the interesting thing is that when you go that way, today is going to be Tiferes Shebetiferes on Lag Baomer, and on the birthday of the Rabbi Marash, it's going to be Hoyt Shebehoyt. You see opening the connection. I brought this here, I can pass it around. Tav Shanun Aleph, the Rebbe gave out this coin. What is this coin? So you'll see, it came with a piece of paper attached to it. It was in a plastic, it got torn. On the paper it says Lag B'Omer Tav Shanun Aleph. On the coin, it says L'chatchila Riba Tiferes Shebetiferes. And it was explained that the Rebbe wanted to give it out earlier in the month, but it wasn't ready then. So he was giving it out on Lag Ba'omer. But it was also very clear. Then the Rebbe spoke about the connection. The Rebbe wanted to connect the Rebbe Marash and Ashbi, that both of them, their way of doing things in the world was L'chatchila Riba. I can pass it around, you can put it for a second. Make sure that I get it back.
Oh, yeah, can we go on a Shabbaton? Oh, wait, we are going. Like, yeah. Whenever you.
Yeah.
You wrote this? What does it do?
It's my wife's, so it's her name.
Oh.
Right then, everybody's name we all got, so just shouldn't get mixed up. One side is what?
The heating story. That was, who was that? I promised 2 weeks of
Warm weather.
That was a rebel?
No, Rabbi Yitzchak or Berditcher. I'm just using that as an example of l'chatchila riba. I want to add another thing. One of the special things that happened on Lag Ba'omer was the 12 psukim that the children recite. When did the Rebbe initiate that on Lag Ba'omer? It was Lag Ba'omer parade. And the Rebbe said that it would be a good idea for children to recite these psukim by heart. It wasn't all at once. And then after that, the Rebbe introduced the other psukim. Eventually, it was all 12 passages, but it started on Lag Ba'omer. Also, Shibana Beis Hamikdash, as you know, every Farbrengen, the Rebbe would conclude the Shibana Beis Hamikdash by davening. The Rebbe would motion with his hand. They should sing Shibana Beis Hamikdash in the part which is right after the Karbanis, before we start Hodu. When was that initiated? It was also on a Lag Ba'omer. It wasn't a parade, but it was a rally in 770. And the Rebbe said that he asked for the Chazan. In those days, the Chazan was someone called Rabbi Teleshevsky. He was the Chazan in Lubavitch. And the Rebbe asked him to come up and to sing the song. Iyar, and the first part was sung as a cantorial piece. But the second part is the niggin, which we all sing, Shibana Beis Hamikdash. And also one of the things that stands out on Lag Ba'omer, and probably today you can have a recording, I'm sure you can hear the recording. It was Tav Shin Chav Zayin, 1967, Lag Ba'omer parade. This is literally a few weeks before the 6-day war. At that time, Egypt and Syria and Jordan were squeezing Eretz Yisrael. They were coming ready to attack, threatening that they're going to annihilate Chas v'Shalom, Hayalisia, and it was a very big thing. Everybody was panicking all over the world. Israel itself, I once heard they prepared for, God forbid, the worst kind of results. And at the end, there was this big miracle that in 6 days the war was over. But that, like Baomer, the Rebbe spoke very strongly. I remember the Rebbe started by saying, our brothers and sisters, these are the words, unsere Brüder und Schwestern, are now in a situation. The Rebbe never verbalized anything negative. just in a situation where they need even more protection from Hashem. And Eretz Yisrael is the place where Hashem protects every Yid. And the Rebbe was very encouraging that everybody should be strong and we'll see miracles. It was so strong that they played it the first time probably ever on the radio in Eretz Yisrael. All of Eretz Yisrael heard it. The only interesting thing is, how did they get it to Eretz Yisrael? Today, this has happened in a second. In those days, someone raced with a cassette to the airport, gave it to someone who's going to be there very soon in 13 hours, and they're going to get it to someone that's going to have it play all over Eretz Yisrael. Today, it would be in 1 second transmitted to Eretz Yisrael. But those were the times in those days.
When it happened this war?
Tovshin Chav Zayin, 1967, right before the 6-day war.
Yeah, but like which month?
Which month?
Yeah.
On Lag BaOmer.
I'm not wrong.
Yeah. Lag BaOmer is also the 18th day of Iyar, Chai. We know that Chai is a special number, especially by the Rabbeim. Baal Shem Tov was born on Chai Elul. The Alter Rebbe was born on Chai Elul. There are other things that happen on Chai Elul, but here this is Chai Iyar, again connected to Pnimis Torah. But it's interesting that the Baal Shem Tov, who was nostalgic at Shavuos, said to his students on Lag BaOmer that that day was Chai. He said to them that in Chai days, in 18 days, and he said that something would happen. They didn't understand that he was alluding to his own passing, his stalkus. But it was 18 days earlier that he said in 18 days from now, which would be Shavuos, would be the stalkus of the Baal Shem Tov. So generally speaking, this day is considered like the day of Pnimis Torah. Again, we know we always associate with Yitzhak Kislev and these dates, but that's stage number 2, that's Chassidus. Stage number 1, when the hidden secrets of Torah began to spread to the world, that's like Baomer, and that's started with the Ashbi, and then it went to Arizal. Not enough time to talk about it, but if anybody wants to learn about it a little bit, between the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov, there were also 3 generations of 3 people who were the ones, their shlichus was to spread Kabbalah in their generation. It started with the Arizal. The 3 people were the Yoel Baal Shem. After him was someone called Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, and after him was someone called Rabbi Adam Baal Shem. And then came Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. I don't know the reason why, but by the others we call them Baal Shem, and by the Baal Shem Tov we call them Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem means the master of the name. Baal Shem's name. They performed great miracles. They also had tremendous opposition. People were against studying Kabbalah. It's something new. We don't do it. It's against Torah. All sorts of things. But eventually we see that it definitely broke through, and the whole world today is now into studying Chassidus. It's all part of the preparation for Geula. Anyway, this is the reason why the Maimarim start with this Maimer, and they all elaborate on this thing. Now, what I'm going to tell you now is a joke, but it happens to be a fact, and that is that Lag BaOmer, when we have a parade, it almost always rains. And if it doesn't rain, it's almost raining. It's about to rain. It's a miraculous reason it didn't rain. Every year, the people who organize the parade would beg the Rebbe for bracha, it shouldn't rain. So the Chassidim say in a humorous way that, Rabbi Shimon Yochai made it rain, and since then, every Lag BaOmer is just an issue with rain. I think it's supposed to rain tomorrow also, if I'm not mistaken. Hope it doesn't interfere with your weekend.
Is there
There what? Is there a parade? There's something, not on the same level, I don't know what, they're having something with the kids. Usually what they do is they have a really an event in a park, and they march to that park.
Doesn't look like much rain, though.
What?
Doesn't look like much rain on Sunday.
Okay, Baruch Hashem.
I think there's a couple carnivals.
To conclude with one more story, and that is that There's a story also of Rabbi Majeski that there's a part in davening which we have in the Siddur, and it's Friday nights. It's before Shemona Esrei. It starts with the word V'shamru. There's 3 short psukim. In most communities, they say it. It's all about the mitzvah in the Torah to observe Shabbos. And not only they say it, it's usually said with a lot of excitement, Chabad is very interesting. The Alter Rebbe put it in his Siddur, but we don't say it. The one time, the 2 tzaddikim met. Rabbi Yitzchak said to the Alter Rebbe, I don't understand, why don't you have your chassidim say V'shamru? When they say V'shamru, there's a yurid, there's a big fear up there. Fear is a place with a lot of commotion. People are buying and selling and a lot of noise. The Alter Rebbe says, I don't have to go in every yurid. I don't have to go attend every fair. Which means there is a fair. It's true, up there's a big commotion, but it doesn't mean that I have to go to every one of these events. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was upstairs on the 2nd floor watching the parade through the window. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, was running the whole parade. This is in the 1940s. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said that even though the Alter Rebbe said he doesn't go to every Yurid, but at this affair, he's there. And the Rebbe himself once spoke about people who did not participate in Baomer festivities. And it's not really for them, they're adults and they're big people. And the Rebbe said, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, for him it was not below his dignity to come and participate in the events. And for this person, it's so basically the Rebbe is saying Reb Shimon Bar Yochai himself is also participating. Wow. Okay. Very active, everybody.
Doing
Kashrus class.
both classes together.
Yep.
Here.